Activity Project 2, Protest as Theatre. March for Our Lives. Isn't that beautiful? So, the gun violence activity you are a part of, the reason for that activity was to show you how, in America, it is frequent occurrence a school shooter breaks in and injures/kills people, and it is the harsh truth and fear that Americans live their life worrying about. It is not fair for school children in a place of education, which is supposed to be safe, is actually very unsafe. And the fact that it happens so often and there is actually drills and practices to keep the students safe is unnerving. This is all due to the fact that guns still aren't banned in America and that they don't do universal background checks, which leads to dangerous people or any person to be able to obtain a gun, even though countless lives have been lost. A protest called March for Our Lives, which was a student-led demonstration in support of gun control legislation, happened after the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, where 17 people tragically died. Due to a group of young people being angry that their leaders failed to keep them safe from gun violence, they decided to take a stand and make their voices heard, as they should. The protest marked a turning point in America's conversation on guns. Lots of action was taken, such as safer gun laws were passed in states across the nation. And this protest drew over 800,000 people and inspired sister marches on every continent. This conveys how if enough people hear about something, then change can actually happen. Showing protest through theatre is effective because not only does it convey and tell a story in an engaging way and lets you portray your message, it can also get acknowledgement and publicity from people understanding the political nature behind the theatre protest. Look at this. Protect kids, not guns. That's right. Therefore, that is why the March for Our Lives protest was chosen to be told in a theatrical way. In an activity with some other workers at the holiday resort, we wanted to retell the story of that protest to some guests, as we found the original protest very powerful, with the real stories being told up on stage and speeches so strong that they emotionally moved everyone that heard it. Not only was the protest so inspiring because it was started and formed by a group of students who wanted change, but because the protest supported a great cause, which I talked about above. And there was such a sad story behind the protest because these students and many others in America live in fear, being worried about being shot. Not to mention, many have already, including the classmates and teachers of those who formed the March for Our Lives protest. The fact that a student-led protest was one of the biggest youth protests since the Vietnam War made it so inspiring, moving and engaging, and one of the reasons why we had to retell it in our own way, from a theatrical form. There's this really cool protest performance activist group called Pussy Riot who does big theatrical protests in public spaces such as the World Cup final, Moscow's cathedral and more. I think they are really awesome and I would love for them to come to my holiday resort at some point. From their protests, they aim to bring about change, and due to their rebellious style and theatrical nature, it gets people's attention and has brought lots of support for them because it is bold, exciting, daring and powerful. It even caught the attention of singer Madonna, who sang Like a Virgin in the balaclava, which is their signature little outfit thing. This shows that doing a protest loud and bold in a theatrical way, is an effective way to get people's attention and support because they notice it and want to know more and then learn about the message. Pussy Riot's theatrical protest really inspired me. After watching a video of Pussy Riot's protest in a cathedral, campaigning against the increased power of the church and Vladimir Putin, I noticed that what made it so effective was that it was so loud and bold and a huge contrast to what was originally happening in the place of worship they rioted and protested at. This further shows that a protest in a theatrical style will get people's attention because it's an effective way to tell a story and it's eye-catching and gives exposure to a cause. Now, you may have already clicked on the link to sign a petition for gun control in America, but just in case you haven't and still want to, it will be on this summary video as well. Petitions are an important way to make change. This is because if enough people sign a petition, then it's very difficult for people higher up to ignore. We've been told that getting this bill passed in the Senate will be impossible, even after a year when nearly 40,000 people died from guns, the highest toll in 50 years. And even though 97% of Americans support universal background checks, which are proven to save lives, the NRA-paid politicians are determined to keep the status quo. This is a quote from the official March for Our Lives website and the petition page to support the cause. This shows they still aren't being taken seriously from the people in charge and with power, so more action needs to be taken. The performance form we chose to retell the protest with, but also making sure to convey the original purpose of the protest as well as the success of it, and making sure our guests understood the message, story and importance behind it, was we chose to have aspects of verbatim and things that happened at the real protest so it could feel a bit like the audience was actually there, but also to add a bit of fear and let the guests watching our performance begin to understand how it could actually have felt being one of those American students. It was a very small reenactment of what the American students would have had to have gone through once the signs went off. So, the students watching had both the feeling of being at the protest, but also a feeling of what the protesters would have felt and what it actually was about due to a reenactment of it. There were many signs that were used in the March for Our Lives protest that conveys how passionate these young people felt about the whole gun situation, and how it's just not right for all these students and people in general to be fearing about whether them or their friends or family could die at any time because of how unsafe the laws are in America to do with guns and safety. So, therefore, we created their posters and signs and handed them out to the audience watching so they could feel a similar atmosphere of everyone holding up hard-hitting posters and signs for the same cause, because everyone at the original protest felt the same way. Plus, signs people wrote at the protest that we have recreated convey a strong message that they want to tell the world. The protester wants to voice this to the world, and it is short, strong, and very effective. Here's my colleagues and I thinking about what we're going to do and also creating posters. Here's some posters from the actual real protest. As you can see here, it says, "Am I next? Protect kids, not guns. Fear has no place in our schools. No more silence. End gun violence." We are the change. So yeah, it is very passionate, and she looks so sad. It's sad they had to do this, but it really does show the importance that they're feeling about this whole issue. Here it is, some more. Us doing a bit of devising and talking about posters and stuff. Save our students. I actually recreated this one. So, one by one, my colleagues and I held up one hand then the other, and it all had writing on it. The writing read out, "The scariest thing in my school should be my grades." This quote was chosen as it was not only someone from the protest's poster, but because it is a true, scary, emotional and thought-provoking sentence that sends a message to people about what students in America sadly think about. And it's true. It definitely should be grades that are the scariest thing they need to fear. Not being scared about themselves or those around them dying, or that a school shooter could attack their school at any moment because of the terrible gun laws. I felt this was a powerful opening of our theatrical protest performance due to the silence, which allows the audience to think, and also, with the hands being up, it represents what students may have had to endure, needing to surrender and show their helplessness to the shooter in order to try and save their life. Then, what starts with the audience being in the middle looking at us, we hand the posters and signs out to people and chant while encouraging the audience to stand in a circle with us, also being on the outside with them. This creates the same protest atmosphere as we are chanting what they said in the protest, and it unites us all together supporting the same cause. We chanted, "Vote them out," as it was a chant everyone at the protest repeatedly shouted, as to convey their want to remove lawmakers who are against stricter gun control laws, and also wanting guns to be removed too for their safety. Here is a YouTube video. I'll also put it in the link below. But in this video you can hear the chants about 30 seconds in. So, where I came into the whole protest thing I took a segment from a speech from the inspirational Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting survivor, Delaney Tarr, as I felt it was so strong and not only lets people understand the seriousness of the amount of people that have died due to gun violence or have had their lives changed, but because she is saying enough is enough and it is time that change happens and no more lives are lost, because it isn't fair and it isn't honoured for students or anyone in America. She gives people the opportunity to think and reflect on how 17 people died in mere minutes, and more will die if action isn't taken. And that's why the protest and making sure their voices are heard is so important. There is the YouTube link there. I'll also put it in the description. But this is her. This is what I took from her speech. Just going to say it now. I am here for every person that has died at the hands of gun violence, and for the many more whose life was irreparably changed because of it. I hope that is why we are all here, because this is more than just a march. This is more than just one day, one event, then moving on. This is not a mere publicity stunt, a single day in the span of history. This is a movement. This is a movement reliant on the persistence and the passion of its people. We cannot move on. If we move on, the NRA and those against us will win. They want us to forget. They want our voices to be silenced, and they want to retreat into the shadows where they can remain unnoticed. They want to be back on top, unquestioned in their corruption. But we cannot and we will not let that happen. We will continue to fight for our lives. We will continue to fight for our dead friends. There will be no faltering, no pauses in our cause. Every moment will be dedicated to those pieces of legislation. Every march, every meeting, every moment, all for that assault weapons ban, to keep these weapons of war out of the hands of civilians who do not need them. All for the prohibition of high-capacity magazines, because no hunter will ever need access to a magazine that can kill 17 in mere minutes. Thank you. Here's me saying that speech. Here's people around with posters. It's a shame that everyone had the same poster in the line, but there were different ones. Everyone in a circle listening to me. Because that is people would have listened in the protest, and they did. All these verbatim speeches are said on a table in the middle of the circle with everyone surrounding it, with posters and signs which create the atmosphere of a protest or march rally, which the audience could then feel included and a part of the cause, to stop gun violence, because not only are they hearing these verbatim arguments and chants, but they are also next to their peers holding up signs with strong messages to feel gathered and a part of something together. Then here's us panicking. Then the siren for a school shooting that gets played in American schools plays, and my colleagues and I, in a panic, shout to and usher everyone under the tables that are planted around in a circle, where a printed protocol is stuck under the tables, as well as my fellow holiday resort activism colleague says, run. When there is an active threat, once you are safe, call 911. If escape is not possible, hide. Block the door. Avoid windows. Silence your cell. Fight only as a last resort, and if your life is in danger. Transforming the audience from being in a protest to acting as if they actually had to hide, as if their life was in danger, was a big shift. It transforms the audience from being a spectator to someone actually being involved like a performer. But it is sort of like a recreation of the similarities of the event that occurred. Changing between the two is effective for the audience because they can empathise and feel the sadness for the people who went through that trauma and want to support the cause and understand the severity of it, and only just begin to feel the fear the students would have felt, and then the anger with the protest and wanting to get their point across. Going back to the two choices I had you pick between earlier, the two choices were to either hide or fight. Obviously, that was just an activity, and you were fortunate enough to not be living in America and to have the constant fear where you were in a classroom and a school shooter is in the school and you have to quickly make a decision of what to do. Hide, run, or fight. Like in the above piece of speech my colleague said above, fight only as a last resort. And if you were to have picked that option, you would have died in the activity, because it is a sad truth that could happen to you if you choose to fight the attacker. And that is because they have more power over you due to them being in possession of an actual weapon. So it was important to address the fact that if someone were to fight back, which they shouldn't do for the safety of themselves, then they would probably, sadly, not survive. Obviously, in the activity, if you choose to hide, that is definitely the safer option. Sticking by the school protocol and following the instructions and then hiding is the safest thing to do. But the sad thing is, there still isn't 100% guarantee the person will survive. But using the activity, I just wanted to portray the two choices someone in that situation would probably have to make. Us using parts of speeches from survivors of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas shooting from the protest is powerful and an effective form of storytelling about the protest, because it lets people understand the seriousness and sadness surrounding this whole protest when they listen and realise that all these speeches and stories that they are saying, it is the actual survivors' real words. And they went through all these things and they believe all of what they are saying. They are passionate about banning of guns and making gun laws stricter, and they want their voices to be heard, which is the reason why they formed the protest in the first place. Therefore, if we use parts of their speeches exactly, it brings the same effect as the people in the audience are hearing these words, probably for the first time, which is what the protesters and marchers in the real March for Our Lives protest would have had as well. It's also like the audience are being transformed back in time to the real protest. My favourite part of the storytelling performance of the protest was the ending, where it was repeatedly said by a colleague of mine, 6 minutes and 20 seconds. I felt this was the most powerful part because it left people with the emotional and powerful fact that it only took 6 minutes and 20 seconds for our whole performance, and the same amount of time for 17 people to have been killed in the school shooting. That then lets it sink in with people and for them to begin to realise how short of a time that was. That in the time we reenacted and told some stories surrounding the protest and the whole gun violence issue, that 17 people died. That can bring some dark realisation for the audience, which can further help portray the importance of having stricter gun laws and guns being banned to stop unneeded lives from being lost. We contrasted between telling a story in silence, to loud speeches, to chants, to us saying important messages and facts as a group, one after the other, to then us ending saying a line in unison. All these theatrical ways to tell the story of a protest and convey a message to the audience was effective, as the silence let the audience really focus in and pay attention to what the message is we were saying. And normally, in theatre or a protest, you don't have silence. So not only at the beginning we had silence with our hands saying words, but at the end we had silence for the audience to reflect on all the information and the seriousness they were just introduced to. Having silence after all the chanting, shouting and mentioning of 6 minutes 20 seconds really brings a whole new perspective and seriousness and calmness to the cause and performance. This linked and was inspired by the peaceful protest for George Floyd with Black Lives Matter in Boston and Salt Lake City. Demonstrators lay down staging die-ins for precisely 8 minutes and 46 seconds. In Houston, churchgoers held candles and bowed their heads in silence, experiencing the crawl of time. The way everyone was silent and on the ground for the same amount of time George Floyd was, except he had a knee in the side of his neck, not being able to breathe. The silence was deafening, as it brought realisation of how long it actually was that George was suffering for. And so, they also were in silence, in the same position out of respect. You find that's an extremely long time to have someone have their knee in the side of your neck, Canon Grant said. So people started to realise more how horrible it was for George and support the cause even more than they already did. Yeah, here's the people on the ground. There's lots of people. No justice, no peace. One love. Black Lives Matter. And so, we were under the tables in silence, just as the school children from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School would have been, because they had to be silent from fear that if they made a noise, the school shooter would come in and kill them. And it is a terrifying thought that they actually could have died. So not only did we pay respects, but after 6 minutes and 20 seconds, we were silent for them. Here's us under the table. Here's people being under the table as well, in silence. The contrast in the way we delivered our story reenactment of the protest was inspired by Pussy Riot, as they went from praying on the floor to getting up and dancing in an anarchistic way. The contrast gets people's attention, which is why we were inspired by them. Us in the ending talking in unison shows how political theatre can bring people together not only as performers, but bring the audience together as well through the connection of being linked and passionate of the same thing. To show theatre can and does bring people together, and that we all believe in this one cause, and not only with just speaking together, but having our guests next to each other, holding signs and being in the same journey together, it connects them and makes them feel similar things to how the survivors of the school shooting would have felt. A line my colleague said in the last speech is, "No one knew that the people who were missing had stopped breathing long before any of them had even known that a code red had been called." And that is such a sad and strong point that had to be included. The fact that so many had died before it had even been acknowledged that this was so serious and a code red, because people in charge thought someone had already told the authorities or was going to declare it a code red, or that they didn't even know that it was a school shooting. So, not only are guns dangerous, but there aren't good enough practices in place to keep students safe. We wanted to shock the audience to allow them to understand further. In preparation for the performance of the protest, we were going to show our holiday resort guests to help them see the seriousness. This video was watched. In this video, there are survivor stories. And it looks into detail and the impact of gun violence and how it can bring such trauma and psychological pain. Which no person should ever have to endure. The fact gun violence happens so often, and there still isn't safe and strict enough gun laws to ensure this doesn't happen and lives don't get lost. Guns shouldn't be allowed. No person, let alone children, should ever have to witness death from guns or people being injured or having a fear that they could die. This YouTube link will also be down in the description. There have been so many school shootings prior to the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, and so many shootings after as well, which conveys that there is still so much more action that needs to be done in regards to gun safety and laws, which is why it is important that voices are heard, which is why it was chosen to perform about this protest. There have been 24 school shootings this year. There have been 116 school shootings since 2018, when Education Week began tracking such incidents. The highest number of shootings, 34, occurred last year. There were 10 shootings in 2020 and 24 each in 2019 and 2018. And from these school shootings, sadly, there were 24 school shootings with injuries or deaths and 43 people killed or injured in a school shooting. People should not be dying. Americans need to feel safe in their own schools. Enough is enough. I believe theatre can be as effective as activism because it can get views, opinions and words across in ways that make people more likely to listen because they can understand more through interesting storytelling ways. Sometimes, subtly informing people about an issue in a way that isn't obvious or directly doing something can be more effective than taking action in an aggressive way, because with theatre, people think they are learning about something through their own accord. They choose to learn so they can take in the information and then can be so affected by it. They choose to take action themselves after the vivid and powerful storytelling known as theatre. Although sometimes activism can be portrayed through the act of theatre, activism can happen through a theatrical stance. Political messages in a way that's different to the generic protest, in a way that's theatrical and bold and engaging in an effective way, to bring in activism and change because it encourages people to pause and take notice and lets them view the world differently in a way that makes you think. This is because activism through theatre is enjoyable as well as persuades you in a political viewpoint. This is Pussy Riot. There's politics through theatre, but there is theatre through protest. Both get people's attention, but there are similarities and differences that need to be understood. Pussy Riot's protest breaking into the church and singing, dancing, praying and kicking and making a huge scene was a very theatrical protest, and due to its boldness and it being out of nowhere, it spread quickly to everyone, and everyone heard of their arrest, their message, and people started supporting them, as their message reached out to people as it was interesting and hadn't been seen like this before. They were loud and inspirational to people, and people wanted to know more. There's also politics through theatre, such as a play about Rachel Corrie, who was a 23-year-old American peace activist who was killed by an Israeli army bulldozer in Gaza. In March 2003, while she was seeking to protect the home of a Palestinian family from demolition, a one-woman play based on her diaries and emails. This is a theatre performance that people watch, knowing the reason they are watching it, because it is political and they are going to learn more, and then afterwards can support the cause, because they can see and understand the meaning behind it deeply. I personally feel, as much as politics through theatre is effective, having a protest in a theatrical way is good because it is unexpected. And it isn't just people who enjoy theatre and drama getting involved and becoming a part of it. Theatrical protests are sort of forcing people to watch and listen, but they stay because they're interested and didn't expect it, and then listen to the cause and want to support because they agree. This is why Pretty Right influenced us on our performance. We want to engage our guests and leave them wanting more. Theatre is powerful and an effective way to give political messages to people. Theatre has an ability to intervene in the social world, and it provides platforms and gives knowledge and understanding to people in a political way. Theatre gives an opportunity to get support for causes and also for people to become opposed to unfair injustices. Theatre can also continue and develop conversations that could have risen through protests and keep interest in the cause even after it has been a few years or months since the protest and the whole situation started. Which is where our performance becomes an example, because although the protest happened in 2018, it's still an issue that hasn't been solved in our day and age, and so clearly needs more support. After my team and I's performance in front of our guests, we had some feedback which helped us to understand what went well in our theatrical performance of a protest. They said there was good use of audience participation, an audience in this space, which shows it was effective, them feeling really included and involved, which helped them feel as if they were actually at the protest and supporting the cause. They also really loved my personal favourite as well, when we said the time of 6 minutes and 20 seconds. We counted down. To sink into the audience how little time there was for all the killings to have happened, and it's like we fit in a whole theatrical protest in the time it took for 17 people to die, which is really shocking. And reiterating it was similar to what was said in the protest, so we took lots of aspects of the protest into our performance. If we were to do it again, we would perhaps encourage the audience to take action as well as thinking about the performance afterwards. And we could have taken it further by bringing in more audience participation and halving the audience and taking them away somewhere to imply the other half died, which lets them realise quickly the severity of how it would have been if their friends were taken from them so quickly and abruptly. We had already incorporated both. Moments from the actual protest and had a theatrical sense, as in we reenacted a terrifying moment the people who organised the protest went through. In the creative period and during rehearsals, it started off with the idea that we were just going to be saying parts of speeches from people, but then we didn't want to just recreate and reenact what happened at the protest. We wanted to bring a sense of fear and further understanding to the severity of what the protest is about and how terrible it is that students in America fear for their lives every day. And here is the bibliography. Okay. So, that was gun violence's activity. I apologise if it was too long. But anyway, would you like to change activity? Watch another summary? Or are you done for today? But make sure you don't forget any of the activities or summaries.